All right, well, let's get started. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about, so if you want to pull up your notes on it a little bit to refresh your memory, capitulation to irrelevance or death. So we're going to kind of the final stage of decline for how the mighty fall. So I'll give you a second to kind of review that because some of you did your write-up like a week ago, so it might be kind of cold. And then we're going to talk about design thinking and work a little bit on kind of getting this project started. So if you want to pull up your notes on capitulation or irrelevance or death, I'm going to show you a 5-minute video about IBM and kind of the decline of IBM. So in our book, because the book was written a couple years ago, it uses IBM as an example of a company that was at the top, then went down, but was able to pull back up out of that death spiral. But now IBM, since, early 2000s has been like this. I mean, they're up and down all the time. So they're not an example. It kind of shows you in business. I mean, you can be very successful right now, and 5 years from now, you could be irrelevant. So that's why this is it's a process, right? You got to kind of stay in the right cycle. But it uses the example of IBM's rebound. So the reason IBM needed a rebound is because they were basically on their way to total collapse. So I want to show you the collapse part here. Interesting, right?
Leave it.
So the let's see, we'll talk about the lights off. Yeah, so IBM, they set the standard for corporate America. They are they were the gold standard for years for basically so many companies copied what IBM did. So I believe under Watson, they kind of established all these, kind of had their Bible of rules for employees, and other companies that followed suit mistakenly thought that if you just did some of the surface things that IBM did, your company will have the same success. So IBM required all their male employees to wear short or long sleeve white shirt, black tie, black sport coat, black pants. They had to wear, I believe, they had to wear like leather soled black dress shoes. They had to wear black leather belt. Couldn't wear, and it kind of went down the line from there. Like couldn't wear cotton pants. Like it had to be like polyester or nylon, or wool. It was like all these different things, and they kind of. It was their corporate culture, but other companies adopted it. So even in the late 90s, I went to work for a Fortune 500 company, and they had followed many of the same things. They're kind of like the grandchild of what IBM did, to where when I first started working there in 99, you had to wear, so for dudes, you cannot wear khakis. So you couldn't wear any cotton pants. You could not wear Doc Martens, which I got my new Chukka boots there today. They're great. You couldn't wear Doc Martens. You couldn't wear any rubber-soled dress shoe. You couldn't wear sweater. You had to wear a sport coat. Or actually, you had to usually wear a suit. You could wear a sport coat, but it had to be a certain kind. So no casual sport coats. And then for ladies, they had really strict standards. So that was they set the standard for what business people wore. Banks did the same thing. Banks had very strict rules. And then a shift happened right around 2000 where the rules changed. And it might have been, I haven't read any studies on this, it might have been Bank of America or one of the large banks actually helped change the culture, because all of a sudden business casual or business wear became no tie, coat coat only, you can wear cotton pants, you know, plus with the rise of probably companies like Dockers and things like that, where it just became the most popular thing to wear. So they started changing all those rules. Women didn't have to wear skirts anymore to work, things like that. So when I worked for ADP, our company was so large. We were one of Fortune's top 10 best companies to work for. Tens of thousands of employees. There was a very popular, especially in the 90s and 2000s, very popular dress clothing store called Men's Warehouse. And they actually made a special video just for our employees describing what the new work casual, work business dress wear was. And then they gave us, any employees of ADP, a discount to go and buy your clothes there. But it's really interesting. But IBM, that's kind of surface stuff. But obviously they had lightning in a bottle for a number of years because they were the mainframe company. And then as computers got smaller and smaller, they still continued to make some of the components for every computer. Every PC had an IBM component in it. So they still had a large place in the market. That's why they were the number one stock to own, things like that. But decline. Gerstner, actually, let's look at some of the things he did real quick, and I want to get your feedback on this. First off, what do you think about Gerstner doing those layoffs? Was it worth it? Like, if you were just making a judgment call, was it worth it to lay off 60,000 people? Yeah.
Well, if you didn't and the company failed, then everybody would lose their job, not just the 60,000 people. So I think take out, and once the company gets bigger, then people are less disciplined, or like they have less responsibility, and people that don't really do anything in the company can be kind of like overshadowed, and you don't really see that they're not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Especially executives, like you could have a bunch of executives and maybe they're not really doing anything but the company is so big you don't really notice.
Yeah.
So like going back to the basics and like finding the root of what everyone is doing and the purpose they have, and then getting rid of the people that don't really have that purpose is important.
Yeah.
Employees as a company are your biggest expense. I remember that from accounting one.
See, people do learn stuff in accounting one. Thank you. Okay. What else? Any other thoughts on that? We had a long discussion about accounting one yesterday.
I think it helps, like, to a point though. I feel like if you don't run with it, it can be just a band-aid solution, because I mean, obviously we can look it back historically and we can see it now that it lasted for a little bit. But you can tell he got the profits back in, he kind of got it back on its feet in a way, but it didn't seem like they really ran with it. Okay, now that we're successful again, let's run with it. It seemed like they were just seeking a quick solution of, we're losing money. How do we get back to making money? It just seemed like as soon as they jumped up, it's like, oh great, we're good now. It wasn't like they actually got back on their feet and were like, okay, how can we continue forward with success and then work to build ourselves back up to what we were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they went back to their, as the book talks about, they went back to the original flywheel, but industry had moved on to new technologies and things. And, it's easy for us to kind of, pick it apart a little bit. I mean, these are big, complicated decisions, but, if they would have been a little more forward thinking, maybe they could have invested in some new technologies, but not necessarily done what Motorola did, maybe more like what Texas Instruments did, and kind of secure, a future. I got to imagine though, like if you were at the helm of a company like this and they lost that many billions of dollars, so you're losing millions per day. You would have to say, okay, the ship is sinking, so we got to plug the hole that's bringing in all the water, and then as soon as the hole's plugged, we got to figure out, how to get the ship going again. And it's a complicated process. And then when you have shareholders, again, that even the video talked about a little bit, they affect some of your decision making. Like instead of being able to do the best thing, sometimes you have to do the thing that the most people like. So that's true even of our college, right? So with COVID, instead of being able to do, so if Dr. Jim could just do what he thought was the best, maybe we would have done something different with COVID. Maybe we would have locked down more, maybe we would have locked down less, who knows? But because you have all these constituents, all these stakeholders, you can't only do what you think is best. You also have to kind of do what pleases the most people, which, for like Gerstner in this case, is playing the long game because, you do work for the shareholders and you do have to kind of still be employed there to be able to affect any kind of positive change. So the 80% of employees that remained at IBM probably love Gerstner. But if your parents were IBM loyalists, and they'd worked there 30 years and got laid off, you'd hate IBM, right? Now, it's some of the stuff behind the way layoffs and things work too is sometimes in these types of layoffs, let's say it was a person that actually was a good worker and they just were in a redundant position. A lot of times corporations offer generous severance packages. Coal miners might get laid off and literally, they see their last paycheck and that's it, in the old days. Companies like IBM, they might give you 3 months or 6 months worth of wages as you leave. They might help you relocate. They might say, hey, we're willing to keep you employed, but you got to be willing to move to upstate New York to that factory, whatever. And so a lot of big companies, they're not as cold-hearted as sometimes it sounds. Now, if a new owner comes in and does a bunch of layoffs, they don't have any attachment to the people a lot of times. And that's a lot of times where you'll see like a whole factory shut down in a town and there's nothing, it's just nothing. Because an outside entity came in and did it and they don't have any personal attachment. Let's look at this real quick. So Gerstner focused on rebuilding his team when he came in. And that was the main thing he did. He got new head of marketing, new communications, new CFO, new general manager of personal computer division, and he removed executives who did not share his sense of urgency or who failed to deliver on their responsibilities. So there's a reason why they lost billions of dollars, and the people in the leadership positions had to be held accountable. So people that weren't willing to either own whatever mistakes they had made or weren't desperate to keep the company afloat were the ones who had to go. Confronting the brutal facts. This is a little bit, I talked about this in another class, but a little bit of the Stockdale paradox. Stockdale paradox is at the same time you confront the brutal facts, you also have a reasonable hope for the future. So he confronted the brutal facts about what was going on. And he basically, it's a formula. The only way IBM is going to survive is to cut this many billions of dollars in the next couple of months. You take the budget, you look at everything and you say, okay, well, there's only one place you can cut that much money, that's in employees. So how do you make that decision? And you start just breaking it down. I'm sure guys like this, unless they're just totally stone cold killers, they probably really bear the weight of those tough decisions the rest of their life. I mean, I've had to fire people, let people go, not renew people's contracts, stuff like that. And it's hard, even the people that you really kind of want to go or that you're actually having to let go for negative reasons. I can't imagine letting go a whole city worth of people that have families and stuff like that. But then you think about, well, we have 10 cities worth of people that still need their jobs, and so we're going to have to keep them. And so, you carry that with you the rest of your life, I'm sure. And he did all these other things: culture, discipline, focusing on their flywheel. And then he really focused on the culture of IBM, which, again, IBM had set kind of this cultural standard for business. He went back to that. And then, he did all these other things that our book actually talks about. So let's talk about this real quick. let me get your feedback. What are some of the takeaways you guys got from the chapter, from capitulation to irrelevance or debt? First off, what is capitulation? What does it
Kinda
mean?
like
Capitulate,
spiraling,
yeah.
maybe, just continuing to go like. Spiraling.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah.
Going with.
That's, I mean, I'd say, Alyssa, that's half of it. So capitulation is, yes, one half of it is kind of continuing down, and it's continuing down to like eventually like a totally surrendered. I think capitulation is like almost like you're just going to go till you give up, basically. And so whether it's a conscious decision, I'm done, or whether that's like what Alyssa's saying, you just go, and then eventually you're just by default done. So give me a takeaway. What'd you get from it? Everyone's gonna have to give something. So
One of the things that I thought was interesting that I didn't really notice in some of the other chapters was talking about the importance of cash. Where he said that you can be profitable but still go bankrupt. So if you don't have the cash to pay your employees, you can still be in a world of hurt, even if you're making a lot of money. So for some of the companies, like I think it was, I don't remember which company talked about in the chapter, but just talking about how they recognized their departure from recognizing the importance of cash in stages 1 through 4, then they could have responded better in stage 5.
yeah.
In addition to that, it talked about like how small companies are really cash conscious. Like they see every single expense and every dollar that comes in, but then bigger companies just like let a bunch of cash come and go because they're super conscious about every single thing they spend the money on.
Yeah.
So, but they end up losing a lot of their revenue. It's just wasted.
I think you like this is the Wall Street Journal. I feel smarter just carrying it around. And this is like yesterday's. I haven't read it yet, but when you do read stories about fraud, a lot of times they're in the big companies because it's a lot easier for it to just kind of blend in. So a big company spends $1 million a minute, hey, if you hide or obscure something that either is a loss or an expense or something like that, it could be very easy because they're not looking at the cash.
I even connected onto that. That was one of the biggest takeaways for me was you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot and then try and run a race. And that reminded me of the Motorola with their satellites and their cell phones. Is they just threw billions of dollars at a program and they're like, yep, it'll work. And then turns out it didn't. So it's incredible how much debt can actually affect you. Because like you said, you can be making all this revenue, but then still be broke because you're spending every single dollar you earn on paying off your debt.
Right.
And so that was like that.
And that's one of those questions that like you never want to ask someone. But so I meet a lot of business owners and a lot of business leaders. And the natural question is, so how much money did your company, make last year? But that question is a little bit fuzzy because that could be how much revenue did they bring in? So say they made $1 million in revenue. What if their expenses are 1.1 million? That means they lost 100,000. No one wants to ask someone, standing around the punch bowl at the Christmas party for the Chamber of Commerce. So how much did you lose last year? So it's kind of a polite thing to just ask how much you made. But a lot of people like to brag about the revenue, but they don't include, are they cash positive or not? So what else?
Something I kind of thought with it was obviously it was like all in cash, so we're all talking about that. But it honestly reminded me of just like personal finances, for people, honestly. You could see the relation of, I see people drowning in debt like literally every day. Like they're just struggling for survival, and it's like kind of frustrating to see. But this is kind of what you see with companies too. If they continue to just build that debt, and lots of times they're just seeking more band-aid solutions, trying to just get through and more of survive somehow. They weren't really seeing like how they can become successful. So it's like building that strong financial foundation, just like we do in our personal lives. It seems like it's like a good, I guess, theory or whatever for businesses as well. Because that's what stuck out to me the most was he talked about how like success is not the key, or success is the key, not survival, which is what a lot of them did when they just took out like billions of debt. They're just like just trying to get over some issue or some lack of profits and stuff like that. But it just ended up bearing them more. It was more of like a 2-year decision, not like a 10 to 15-year decision.
Yeah, and that's that's one of the problems are sometimes when you have stage 4 and they bring in a savior, the savior person, salvation person is thinking of a 2-year because, they got their salary and they got to make these decisions while they're there, but they might not be thinking about the long term, especially if they're not from the company. A lot of times bringing a total outsider, their priorities might be a little different. So what else?
That was interesting that he gave like 2 different options for a company to take at this stage, either like give up or run out of options. And the running out of options one, it just seems like companies try to throw out every single thing they can just to survive, like we were saying, but they don't actually focus on the core purpose, like for success. And like what Carlos was saying, like you need to figure out your problem and then build a solution based off that, not just try to like do quick solutions.
Yeah. In sports, particularly in soccer, activity does not necessarily equal progress, right? So, people running all around and it seems like, there's a lot of positive activity, but if the ball's never going in the goal, you're not actually winning, right? You're just having a bunch of activity. And you could have the same thing in business. And so some people call it rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah, you think you're doing something positive, but the Titanic's going down. What else?
Going along with that, I like to quote, what would be lost and how would the world be worse off if we ceased to exist? And that can help you look to your core purpose and figure out what the problem is.
Yeah. That's a good, honest question, I think, for organizations to ask when they're going through a hard time. It's not about giving up. It's about what I would call shelf life. So I worked in an organization in New Hampshire for a year. And when I got there, they said, Jared, you got to deal with this college. So there was a college in New England, the New England Bible, and they had New England School of the Bible. It had been very successful in the 60s and 70s. A bunch of first-generation Christians that worked full-time jobs. They started taking Bible Institute classes, and it became something you could actually get your bachelor's degree from. They even got accredited. And so it grew, and they had satellite locations at different churches, and one church kind of sponsored it, and they had enough. They were bringing in to pay a couple salaries, and the Bible college movement was booming in the 80s and 90s. But then, Liberty online courses and more distance learning. And then some of the other Bible colleges grew enough to where they're able to offer more programs. And so this school started shrinking. And by the time I got to where I was at, they were down to 3 students. They had 1 full-time salary, and they were scholarshiping to the 3 students like 100%. So they were giving away. They literally just, it was just an expense. There was no revenue. And so, but because it was a ministry, because it'd been around, because, don't you love Jesus? It was really hard for anyone to make an honest decision about the college. They had a board that was dysfunctional. The board hadn't met in 3 years. So of course they're not looking at the finances because they couldn't even get the board to meet together. So I was the new guy in town. I said, okay, you're in charge of it. I said, okay, we're going to close it. What? So I called a board meeting, finally got everyone together. I said, I propose that we close this. We have these 3 students. We would lose less money if we just gave them each a $5,000 scholarship to go to any other Christian college. And let's shut this down and let's try and help the one staff member find a job somewhere, whatever. He's, godly guy, great pastor type guy. So I said, listen, I'm not the murderer, I'm the coroner. It's already dead, just no one's willing to say it. So that was unpopular, and I didn't have to lay off 60,000 people. But someone's got to just be honest eventually. You just cannot, everything cannot continue forever. And it's not that it didn't have a great history. Like, you have to recognize the legacy. It met the need. But a term that we used to use a lot at Harvest was called, we would say, shelf life. Everything has a shelf life. There's a reason why there's not 10 Bible colleges celebrating their 100-year anniversary. Because colleges, they rise, they meet a need, they decline, other things rise, meet the need. And that's just how God has made this world to work. So it's okay to say, maybe we've served our purpose. Maybe it's time God's going to do something different. And so it's organizations, businesses, there's a reason why, there are not a lot of 100-year-old restaurants, because there's very few that are going to be relevant for that long, So there are some. There aren't hardly any businesses that last 100 years. I think the oldest business in the world is in Japan. I think they've been around 700 years or something like that. But that kind of fits into Japanese culture a little bit. But I think that's the oldest, the longest running business that they can actually trace that's been actually, the same company the whole time. So
What type of business is it?
seems like they make they either make soy sauce or they make no, I know it sounds so but it's either a soy sauce company or it's a company that has
I think this says it's a construction company that builds Buddhist temples.
yes, that's it, construction. I was thinking construction, like I was picturing the temple that I saw in the thing. So yeah, so there you go. Well, at least now I didn't make it up because Joe Googled it. Yeah, been around, and I don't even know if 700 years is right. I was guessing. Yeah, I forgot. Okay, what else? Who hasn't given feedback yet? What else about capitulation, irrelevance, or death?
Kind of going off of what you said, just like that, when a company, like their objective should be just to survive, because then you're just keep spiraling down and you're going to hit the bottom eventually, but you're just going to prolong it. So the goal should be just to push past that, and also going off what Krista said, just fill a hole that people need. So instead of sometimes you might need to rework what you're selling as well. So you might be like a pasta sauce company and that's not going well. So maybe you need to change to a salsa company or something like that. Just being able to not be stubborn and stick with what you know, but be willing to change and to adapt to what people need.
Yeah.
I think the thing that stood out to me was when it said you can be profitable and bankrupt. So it's almost like probably after the denial phase, but just the idea that things can be going really well, but you can kind of slowly becoming less and less, with your bills, and things can be piling up, and it's a lot bigger, kind of like Joe was saying, in a big company, you have people that aren't really doing anything, but you're still paying them, but they're not really helping the company. So you're still kind of thriving, but at the same time, you're kind of losing revenue and losing your cash supply or whatever. So just the idea of being very cash conscious.
The United States of America has a problem with this. We are profitable and bankrupt all at the same time. We are superpower, but we're trillions in debt to China. I mean, so people in this neighborhood, you got people that, and Daniel, because he works at a bank, probably sees it, but you got people that make $250,000 a year, they have 3 new vehicles, a 5-bedroom house, they probably have a little lake property somewhere, and they can't hardly pay their cell phone bill or they slow pay their rent, or they're behind, they're getting another loan to, for Christmas present. So they're making a lot of money, but they're not actually in good shape. Anyone else? Jared, what'd you get from that chapter? I know you came in a little late, but.
I've been getting, pretty much the same thing from some people, what I picked out of it. And it was from the first example in that chapter, the anecdotal example of the teacher, professor in his classroom. And when he was asking students, he showed them a business and he was asking students what the problem was. And he was waiting for that answer about cash. And, it was just surprising to me to think that a company that is profitable can't make payroll for the next upcoming pay cycle. And so it was just a change of mindset when it comes to even looking at companies and, from the outside, trying to determine whether or not they are a successful company. It's nothing new that anybody hasn't said before, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Good. Well, when I worked for ADP, my division was what they call emerging businesses. So 1 to 99 employees. And at that time, this is 20 years ago, the average was only 1 out of 5 of those businesses would make it past their second year, I think. And then out of that, even less would make it like to 5 years. So I had, in the couple of years I worked there, businesses that started and then closed, and another business started in its place. A lot of small restaurants go down that path, and there's a lot of reasons for it. Like that Richard Branson video, was that in here? That was the entrepreneur one. That's the business management class. Richard Branson, the guy who started Virgin Records and Virgin Atlantic, and he has over 300 companies. He said simply that a lot of entrepreneurs start out in debt, and so they don't make it. It's really hard. It's not impossible, but it's really hard to start a business in a significant amount of debt. And if you think about it, let's say that you decided to start a coffee shop. Let's say that you bought the Ziggy's franchise out of Colorado and you want to start it here in Ankeny, like it just started. So you have to first off have a location. If you do a build out in a commercial location, it could probably cost you $50,000 if you did some of the work yourself. So you need $50,000 just for the location. And then your monthly rent is $3,000 a month, and that's a good deal. So there's another $36,000 in your first year. So now you're up to $86,000. One espresso machine, depending on what brand you get, but they're all from Italy. All the good ones are from Italy. Is going to cost you no less if you have a 4-head machine. And I don't know, you worked at Caribou, right? Or how many you worked at coffee shops? No, I'm getting you mixed up. So like one of those like commercial machines has like 4 heads. I believe those are like $15,000 to $25,000. So now you're up over $100,000. Then you got to get all your supplies, right? So you need your first month's worth of stuff, maybe $5,000 to $10,000. That initial purchase of some things you won't have to replace right away. Then you got your insurance. You got your, let's say you need to have 2 or 3 months worth of payroll in arrears just in case something happens. So you're talking to be able to start conservatively. If you and your whole family works there, you need $150,000 easily. Oh, plus the franchise itself. To buy a franchise, no less than $100,000 to buy a franchise. Now, sometimes they space that out, or it's based on how successful you are and stuff. If you bought the franchise, add another $100,000. That's $250,000. So you need that before you even start building, which is like Ziggy's is taking a year to go into that location. So you're not earning anything and you're putting all that money out there. What most people do is they say, okay, they have to have a certain net worth. They put their house up, as collateral. They get a loan from their in-laws to co-sign with them. They do all this stuff. They cobble it all together. And now they have a $250,000 mortgage payment, basically. And it's months before they've even started. Sometimes the bank will charge them interest only. But even on $250,000 loan, you're paying a couple thousand a month and you're only paying interest. You haven't started paying on the loan. That's just for the privilege of having the money. Then as soon as the business opens, you start paying the full mortgage. 250,000 is 1,500. And then your rent, you have rent and arrears, but now you're also paying your payroll, your rent. You're needing to make 10,000 a month, and you're open, 30 days. So you start dividing up how much you need to make per day. So how much you need to make per person that walks in, how many people need to walk in, how much does each person need to spend? I don't know if a coffee shop could make it starting in debt, like starting in that kind of debt. You would have to have some of your own cash. But then when you put your own cash in, think of the liability there. If it doesn't make it, no one's going to give you your cash back. The franchise doesn't give you your money back. It just disappears. The landlord isn't going to give you your money back. You'll have a garage full of restaurant equipment and a bunch of cups you never used. So it's a high stakes thing. And so a lot of organizations start off, they've got everything except for the cash. And the cash is what kills them. So that's why, in business, cash is king. That's why a lot of businesses, successful businesses, operate almost like a cash only thing. So we have a lot of, I'll let you guys go over this. We have a lot of Korean business people in Guam. They move to Guam, they start a business so their kids can go to American schools, get scholarships to American colleges, live the American dream. And a little bit of flawed thinking sometimes, but a lot of the Korean businesses operate in cash. Could be that they didn't want to pay as much in taxes, because if you're handling cash, you might not have to record everything the same way. But it also, by operating in cash, you're securing the ability to control whether or not your business is going to make it. So, interesting concept. Okay, so Friday, we're going to talk about our design thinking challenge, and we're going to work on this jobs office idea, and that's going to become our project. So that's what we'll tackle Friday. Alrighty? Okay, thank you very much. See you guys later.